We're here to cram for the exam. Welcome back. Last episode we talked about foundations. Today we talk a little bit more about a critical foundational term, federalism.
Federalism was a big experiment. Certainly we entered this country as different states. We created a strong central government with the Constitution, but they purposely allowed states to have specific powers as noted in the Bill of Rights 10th Amendment.
Federalism was created to protect our individual liberty. The founding fathers were afraid that if the power rested in one place, a tyranny would be born. You're right, Andy, in the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment provided us what we call the reserved powers. Although the state powers were not individually listed, it maintained that if there were powers that the national government did not possess, it belongs to the states.
This was a purposely vague statement, and of course for 220 years, many of our most contentious debates have been about where does the power of the central government end and how far can states go, even in controversial policies.
Let's talk a little bit about the benefits of federalism, Andy. Certainly, federalism shouldn't be seen as a layer cake, where each level of government has its own responsibilities. It does encourage and propose innovative ways to cooperate. We call this a marble cake, where the national, state, and local governments work together to fulfill some sort of policy.
And certainly we've seen states throughout American history experiment with different policies, some successful and some highly controversial. Legalizing medical marijuana, different treatment of educational programs, different ways to handle healthcare in society.
Individual states are like laboratories. But Andy, something I love federalism the most, what I love federalism the most about is how it encourages political activity. If all the government is in one place, those of us who are hundreds, thousands of miles from the seat of government are less likely to be involved. Federalism encourages participation.
Participation in school boards, participation in community libraries, all these different levels of government represent federalism, sharing government's powers between a central government, state, and local governments.
But Andy, let's get real for a minute here. Federalism has changed over time. This balance between national, state, and governments has really grown to be imbalanced. The national government has grown far greater than anyone really imagined 200 years ago. This aggrandizement, and it's happened because of the sticks and carrots that the federal government uses.
Well, it's also happened because of crises, both economic crises like the Great Depression, where we saw an enormous expansion of the role of central government in our economic lives, but also the wars. The Cold War, extended wars like the global war on terror, where the central government increasingly takes roles that it never had before or that used to be done by local governments.
Well, using the Constitution itself, our national government has rested on the necessary and proper clause, the elastic clause, to extend its power, but most definitely the Commerce Clause, allowing the Congress to regulate interstate commerce, has really meant the aggrandizement of our national government. Andy, let's make the difference here between grants and mandates.
Well, certainly the federal government has an enormous budget, and it can use its spending power to also extend the power of the federal government. So, for instance, it can grant money to local communities and states for the expansion of highways or the maintenance of highways. But they can also have conditions of aid indicating that if you accept this grant money, state of Illinois, state of Louisiana, you also have to accept that your drinking age has to be no lower than the age of 21. That would be a condition of aid. We'll give you this money if you follow through on this policy.
Let's look at two different types of those grants. We have categorical grants and block grants. The least discretion is in the categorical grant. You must take this money and spend it on expanding your local airport. Conversely, a block grant would be, here's money for transportation. You, the state, use it any way that you please to somehow benefit transportation.
Then we have these other issues known as federal mandates, and these are strictly orders. For instance, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in the 1990s telling state and local governments that you must make public facilities accessible to those with disabilities. That would be a federal mandate. If the government doesn't follow through with funding for those, we call those unfunded mandates.
We're talking about federalism and we're cramming for the exam. Let's review. Federalism is that division of power between national, state, and local governments for the intent purpose of protecting our liberty. But history would prove that the central government has become aggrandized, taken on more and more power, and there that tension lies even today. Where should the power in our government be, and how do we develop a national government without too much power? We're here to cram for the exam. No fancy words.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.